You may be seated. Just quickly before my sermon and before I forget, two more things to mention. I want to wish a Nesiat Tova to Michael Chaiklin, who will be leaving for a month in Israel tomorrow. Michael, where are you? Oh, there you are, Michael. He'll be leaving to spend a month with his family in Nahariya starting tomorrow. So we wish you nothing but a safe and very, very happy trip, Michael, and enjoy spending time with your cousins and your family. It should be wonderful to be with them. And also, Monday, we have another special birthday. Monday will be Jay Jaffe's birthday, this coming Monday. So let's all wish our past TBS president and dear friend Jay Jaffe a Yom Huledet Sameach. 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 Okay. In the early 1850s, the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass delivered one of the most impassioned speeches of his career at Faneuil Hall in Boston. Or some say that this particular speech was actually not delivered in Boston, but rather in Salem, Ohio. The truth is, we don't really know where this famous story occurred. But what we do know is that when Frederick Douglass delivered this particular speech, he was in a very dark place. Although he had escaped from slavery in 1838, by the 1850s, his struggle was far from over. He struggled with white laborers who refused to work with him in the shipyards. He struggled with schools who refused to accept his children as students. He struggled with politicians who talked incessantly about the abolition of slavery, but who took little to no action in terms of actually abolishing slavery. All of Frederick Douglass's pent-up anger, frustration, and pain came pouring out of him on stage during that famous speech in 1852. On that night, he spoke passionately and without a filter about the evils of slavery. His message was dark and violent as he railed against the injustices that he had personally been subjected to for so many years. And he ended his speech that night by saying that black people in this country had no hope of ever getting help from white people. If black people wanted to be free, Frederick Douglass said, the only way they would ever accomplish that goal was by freeing themselves. And the audience was stunned into silence. They had watched their hero transform from a passionate advocate for freedom into a hopeless nihilist in real time right before their eyes. And when his speech was finished, a voice cried out from the back of the room. It was the voice of Frederick Douglass's dear friend, the abolitionist Sojourner Truth. "Frederick," she called out, "is God dead?" Those are precisely the words that Frederick Douglass needed to hear at that moment. And by the way, those are also the words that are engraved on Sojourner Truth's tombstone. At his lowest point, Sojourner Truth reminded Frederick Douglass that he had no right to deny his followers of hope, to rob them of the belief that the world can be a better place. On that fateful night, Sojourner Truth reminded Frederick Douglass that regardless of the darkness of the world, hope must always triumph over despair. And that is precisely the message of this morning's Torah portion. In this morning's parashah, we read of the Chet HaMeraglim, the infamous sin of the spies. Prior to entering the Promised Land, Moses sends 12 spies on a reconnaissance mission to scout out the land and bring back a report. And it's the spies' responsibility to determine whether or not the land is fallow or fertile, whether its cities are open or fortified, and whether its people are weak or strong. And 10 of the spies come back and tell Moses that although the land is indeed flowing with milk and honey, they will never be able to successfully colonize it. It's simply too dangerous. They say, "We can't go up and conquer the people. They are much stronger than we are. The land that we scouted is a land that devours its settlers. Eretz ochelet yoshveahi. The people there are giants, and we are like grasshoppers." And as a result of this negative report, the fate of the Israelites is sealed. God punishes the entire people Israel by sentencing them to 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, corresponding to the 40-day mission of the Meraglim. If you wonder why we wander for 40 years, it's because the mission of the spies was 40 days long. Having failed to demonstrate faith in God, faith in themselves, and faith in the future, the generation of the Exodus is condemned to die in the wilderness. And Nachmanides, the great 13th century Spanish commentator, tells us that the entire punishment that God metes out after the report of the spies hinges upon the word ephes, which means but. The spies began their report positively. They say that the land is indeed flowing with milk and honey, eretz zavat chalav udvash, and then they say ephes, but it is also a land inhabited by giants and warriors. Its people are strong. Its cities are fortified. We will never successfully conquer it, they say. And as Nachmanides teaches us, that's the true sin of the spies, the inclusion of the word but. The land is beautiful. It flows with milk and honey, but it is also deadly. When they uttered that single word, they robbed an entire generation of all the hope for the future that they had been clinging to since they left Egypt. At that moment, both the spies and the entire nation relinquished their hope, and they gave in to despair. And God understood that a generation without hope, a generation defined by hopelessness and despair, could never be the generation to settle the promised land. Next week will mark 9 months since October 7th. 9 months since the Jewish world was rocked to its very core and our lives as Jews were changed forever. Over 100 hostages remain in captivity. Rates of anti-Semitism have exploded, not only here in the United States, but all over the world. College campuses are no longer safe spaces for Jewish students. At this precarious and dark moment for our people, it can be very easy to slip into the mindset of Frederick Douglass in 1852 or of the spies in this morning's Torah portion, a mindset of fear, of hopelessness, of despair. But remember, only 10 of the spies returned with negative reports. 2 of the spies, Caleb and Joshua, returned with positive reports. Caleb and Joshua maintained unwavering faith in God's promise to the people. They exhorted the Israelites to remember that God will defend them and protect them no matter how difficult things may seem. Like Sojourner Truth, thousands of years later, Joshua and Caleb remind the people that God is not dead. And because they never lost hope, because of their faith in the future, Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 members of the generation of the Exodus permitted to enter the land of Israel. 9 months into this terrible time of crisis for the Jewish people, we have an obligation to follow not in the footsteps of the 10 spies, but rather in the footsteps of the 2 spies. In the footsteps of Sojourner Truth, who was able to lift Frederick Douglass up from the bitter depths of despair, from a place of hopelessness to a place of hope. At this dark and terrible time for the Jewish people, we have no choice but to hope. In the months following October 7th, Rabbi David Wolpe, Rabbi Emeritus of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles, was asked how he is able to maintain a sense of hope in the midst of such overwhelming darkness. And here's what he said: "What gives me hope is that I imagine myself in a conversation with my great-great-great-grandfather. And I say to him, great-great-great-grandfather, it's terrible what's happening to the Jewish students at Harvard." And he says, "They're accepting Jewish students at Harvard?" And Rabbi Wolpe says, "Yeah, but you don't understand. There's terrible anti-Semitism, anti-Israel sentiment on campus." And his great-great-grandfather says, "There's an Israel?" And Rabbi Wolpe says, "Yes, but America is talking about shaving off billions of dollars of the aid it sends to Israel every year." And the grandfather says, "Not only is there an Israel, but America sends it billions of dollars of aid every year?" Yes, this is a dark and terrible time for the Jewish people. There's no question about that. But the truth is, despite the darkness, we remain a people who are incredibly blessed. Despite everything that has happened since October 7th, we continue to be among the very luckiest Jews who have ever lived. And that thought continues to fill me with great hope. Od lo avdat tikvatenu, our hope is not lost. Shabbat Shalom.